Lord, help us to see you more clearly, to love you more dearly, to follow you more nearly, day by day. Amen. Please be seated. Fall of 2017, along the Gulf Coast of Mexico on the coast of Texas, Hurricane Harvey began forming. And I was still the brand new rector of St. Stephen's in Texas, watching on the news as Hurricane Harvey came to make landfall and then town by town traveled up the coast, flooding city by city, church by church, community by community. We gathered around the TVs and we watched the weather, seeing this incoming storm, knowing there was nothing we could do about it. Nothing we could do to save ourselves, to prevent from what we saw coming. And then when the storm did strike and St. Stephen's Church flooded, Parish Hall flooded, so many parishioners' homes flooded, and we were at a loss, at an utter loss for what to do to save ourselves, to rebuild, to restore. So many members moved away, just left. And the ones who stayed behind gathered looking at their flooded church and just felt a kind of a despair and a helplessness. What will we do? Now, why am I bringing up this uplifting story on this day when we're supposed to be celebrating the Transfiguration? Because the Transfiguration, I'm convinced, is about three things. One, about who God is. Two, about who we are. And three, to where we are called. When the Hebrews living in Egypt found themselves in the path of growing oppression, marginalization, they could see their eventual enslavement coming their way, like watching a storm coming their way, and could do nothing to avoid it. And the inescapability of their slavery was despairing for them, left them feeling enslaved without a way to save themselves. And what happened in that moment? What happened in that moment was Moses was called up the mountaintop. He climbed the mountain and there met the glory of the Lord and learned three important things at the top of that mountain before God. One, he learned that God had created all things and loved creation. Two, God had created him in God's image, and God loved it. Three, God had a job for him to do, to now go down that mountain and to go and to create and to love. Moses was not allowed to stay up on the mountain with the glory of the Lord. He was called to go down, and God said, didn't ask, commanded, follow me. And Moses did. He went down the mountain and created and loved, literally created signs of God's power and creation and love for this world, literally created a path through the sea for people to be free, created a world for them, a home for them, where they wouldn't just be safe, but be reminded of God's love for them. Going back to Texas for a moment, sitting in our flooded church at St. Stephen's, despairing, wondering what we are going to do. And the presiding bishop, Michael Curry, came and visited all of the churches that had been flooded. He came to St. Stephen's and had a lunch with us. I learned two very important things about Michael Curry that day. One is that he's basically just a big old grandpa. Like, he immediately honed in on my son Owen, who was just learning to walk, and he scooped him up and kind of bounced him around on his hip and talked baby talk with Owen, talked with him more than he talked to any of the adults the whole time he was there for our lunch. But I also learned that for me was a personal mountaintop experience. That Michael Curry is like a one-man mountaintop experience. I was sitting there at lunch with him and just feeling very bad about myself and what are we going to do about this church? And he reminded me of 3 things. He reminded me that God created us and loves us. That God created me and loved me. And that I am called to then go out into the world and to create and to love. I'm not called to stay in my own little personal flooded mountain at St. Stephen's. I'm called to go down. And Michael Curry didn't ask, he commanded, follow me. And the people of St. Stephen's went out and began starting to help people rebuild in their homes, helping build new homes with members of the church, friends, strangers alike, going out and creating and loving, literally creating safe places. And of course we had, church insurance. They took care of the church building and rebuilt that, and it was all good again. But we weren't called to just stay in our mountain. That was where we were inspired and then sent out to go live changed lives. That is a transfiguration story. The story of, I'm pointing here because that's the transfiguration window there. Take a look at it sometime if you can't see it from there. The transfiguration story. A story of Jesus climbing up the mountain, being followed by his disciples. And where did they meet the glory of the Lord? Up on the mountain. Now Matthew, the gospel writer Matthew, does an amazing thing here because he knows that the people are looking for a Messiah, and he knows the connection they would have immediately made to say, aha, this is the new Moses. He's the one that's going to lead us up the mountain. He's the one that's going to free us from our slavery and give us easy and good lives. He's going to come down and save us. And then that comes the plot twist. The plot twist in Matthew, which is probably second only to the resurrection itself as a surprise. Because Jesus is not the new Moses. They're expecting him to go up and be Moses. But he climbs up the mountain and he's God. So who's Moses in that story? Well, it's Peter and James and John. It's his disciples. It's us. The ones who are called to go up the mountain and let the glory of the Lord be revealed to us. So we learn 3 things: that God created and loves, that we in the image of God were created as God's children to be loved, and we are not called to stay up on the mountain. Like Moses, we are called to go back down and create and to love the way we were made to, and Jesus says, follow me. So we, the people of St. James, create our mountaintop experiences. That's what we do when we gather here, right? That's why we have this church, to come here and create this experience of having God be revealed to us, having those 3 questions be answered. That's those mountaintop experiences, like when our Wednesday evening choristers come together in their room and they pray and give thanks for just how lucky they are to have each other. And then they go out and they lead us in our weekly evensong. It's what our feeding ministry does right now when they're gathering and feeding hundreds of people. And they start off with the mountaintop of saying, how lucky we are. We are so thankful to be gathered here with each other. And now let's literally create meals, but also to create love here with one another. It's what so many of our groups do when they gather to support each other. Whether it's our Monday morning prayer folks that gather with each other, EFM, I mentioned our EFM folks that have literally it's meant to be a mountaintop experience, not to come up and to dwell in it forever, but to then go and be sent out. When we dismiss you today at the dismissal, go back down the mountain and create and love as you were called to do. So as we gather for our 40 days of Lent that's coming up soon, and we will be spending 40 days of pondering within our hearts who we are called to be, how we are called to be the people of St. James, how are we called to live our lives? Maybe a good way of starting that out is by with those three questions. Who is God? Who are we? And to where are we called? So let this be the first invitation for all of you to a holy Lent. Thanks be to God. Amen.